albeit with grey leaden skies. Then the rain peps up once again through much of Wales, the Midlands, Northern England for a time on Friday morning. Some heavy downpours also potentially for the southeast of England. Could cause some issues, a rain warning in force. That clears through, and then colder weather arrives for the weekend, with quite a few showers for Saturday, drier for Sunday, and some overnight frosts.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Christopher Hope interviews Sir Keir Starmer up in Liverpool, and tonight we debate, does he look like a Prime Minister in waiting? As the King speaks out on Israel, we go to Tel Aviv to get the latest situation, and a potentially disastrous piece of news for the government in the Rwanda court hearing. All of that in just a moment, but first, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight from the GB newsroom is that Israel is warning its residents in the north of the country to stay home and lock doors, raising possible concerns of a possible infiltration into the north. Israel Defence Forces say at least a dozen drones were spotted in the region about an hour ago, but there's no evidence of any impact following the aerial alerts. And earlier, the UK's Foreign Secretary, who's currently in Israel, was forced to run for cover when a siren sounded. The video was posted on social media by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, the government saying James Cleverly's visit is a sign of the UK's unwavering support for the country. Well, let's show you some live pictures that are coming to us from Gaza in the south of Israel. We can tell you that night has fallen now. You can see a hubbub of light in the centre of shop, but very little else. The only power station that was functional has stopped working. It stopped working earlier on today. And we believe that power coming now from generators thought to be the only source of electricity in the city. Well, this afternoon, the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, addressed the crisis, saying crucial life-saving supplies, including food and water, must be allowed into the Gaza Strip.
I am concerned about the recent exchange of fire along the Blue Line and recent reported attacks from southern Lebanon. I appeal to all parties and those who have an influence over those parties to avoid any further escalation and spillover. I call for the immediate release of all Israeli hostages held in Gaza. Civilians must be protected at all times. International humanitarian law must be respected and upheld.
Guterres. Well, it's been confirmed a 26-year-old British man who was working as a security guard at the Supernova Festival in Israel when it was attacked by Hamas at the weekend is dead. Jake Marlowe, who's been missing since the raid on the festival, died in southern Israel. His mother, Lisa, wrote on Facebook that she and her family were heartbroken after hearing the crushing news. Now, in other news today, a Dorset councillor has lost a High Court fight with the Home Secretary over the housing of asylum seekers on the Bibby Stock home, currently moored in Portland Port. Mayor Carolyn Parks wanted to challenge the lawfulness of the use of the barge in Portland Harbour, saying the Home Office needed planning permission to site it and use it in that location. The vessel has been empty since Legionella bacteria were detected on board back in August, with the Home Office now saying the barge is clear and safe for asylum seekers to return to. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Good evening. We will go to Tel Aviv and discuss what's happening on day 5 of the war. But first, let's get some analysis of Sir Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, which was rather taken off the news bulletins last night. Now, the response. The Daily Mirror, well, their front page today was absolutely clear. A Britain built to last. Yes, this is our man, and he's going to be in power for at least the next 10 years. The Daily Mail took a very different view. Not a mention of tax or migration. And fascinatingly, the Sun newspaper, which of course has been backing the Conservative Party for many years, big double-page spread. Finally, a glittering speech by Starmer. Well, of course, the play on words and a bit of fun on glitter, but interesting to see that the Murdoch press at the end of this conference season are very much hedging their bets, no longer unequivocally backing the Conservatives, the Murdoch press getting ready to back and support a Labour government in office. It's what they do. They like to back a winner. So I guess the question is he a Prime Minister in waiting? Well, I have to say, for me, he's pretty blooming dull. Not the sort of fella you go for a night out with, but he's safe. And he's playing safe, because he isn't really saying very much from what I can make of it. But the most important thing for Sir Keir Starmer is that he isn't scary. He isn't scary in a way that for many people in this country, Jeremy Corbyn was. So to me, is he a PM in waiting? Yes, I really think he is. What do you think at home? Give me your views, please. Farage@gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined by GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope, and Stephen Pound, former Labour Member of Parliament. Now, Chris Hope, you interviewed Sir Keir Starmer today.
Yep. In Liverpool, on the end of his party conference. It's fascinating. It was 6 minutes, not long. I tried to answer those questions which the Daily Mail actually raised. I wasn't aware of that headline before I did this.
I believe you.
I really wasn't aware of it. About taxation and immigration. On taxation, he said, interesting, I said, where are you going on tax? Because the Tory party is saying we can't only get tax cuts to bring inflation down. He talked about bringing it eventually, under some questioning from me, we're going to cut tax for working people. So I think that's that's interesting, isn't it? To have a Labour leader saying that to almost back the Tories into saying something else on tax. That's the beginning of a debate going next year. But I thought one interesting question that you would have liked, Nigel, was when I asked him about the European Union and whether really he thought the UK might go back into the EU if he becomes Prime Minister. Here's what I have to say on the EU. Try and get the UK more closely aligned to the EU? Would you even try and reverse the result in 2016 and go back into the EU?
We will not try to reverse the results. We do not intend to go back into the EU and, for that matter, into the single market or the customs union. That doesn't mean I don't think we can improve on the deal that we've got. And I think whether you look at security, whether you look at arts and innovation or trade, almost everybody thinks there's room for improvement. We saw that to an extent in the protocol that the Prime Minister renegotiated earlier this year. But we're not arguing, we're not making the case there is no intention to return to the EU.
OK, listen closely. We don't intend to go back into the EU. There's no intention to go back into the EU. Now, you were a politician, Nigel. You are a brilliant superstar panel presenter here. You know what these words mean. Stephen Pound can know more. Intention, intend is not saying no. That's fascinating. He, of course, said in 2018 there should be a second referendum and on the ballot paper should be reversing the 2016
What do you make of that, Stephen Pound? What do you make of that?
I have to say it's a number of things. First of all, it's remarkable that the interview took place at all. Well, when you think, no, it was an excellent interview and fair play to you, but when you think there's a lot of people very sniffy, you know, they've got really their noses up in the air when it comes to GB News. When you've got potentially the next Prime Minister of this country giving a decent interview, and I have to say he was probed by you very well indeed. I think one of the questions that you asked, which he was looked a little bit awkward about, was, you know, why don't you like being called Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, I think that...
Well, no, fair play, Chopper. I mean, sorry, Mr. Hope.
Chopper.
But I mean, I think he actually went the full Farage, basically, on Europe. But I have to say, just one thing, just to reassure you, gentlemen, anyone who doubts that the Labour Party hasn't fully embraced the principles of capitalism should be aware that within half an hour of the glitter incident, the Labour Party stalls were actually advertising T-shirts, sparkle with Starmer, glitter.
Were they really? How
absolutely.
entrepreneurial?
Yeah, aren't we just?
Well, you are. On the migration stuff, Chris.
Yes, exactly.
Now, I mean, there was so little in his speech on this very important...
It wasn't raised at all,
and for the Red Wall,
exactly,
which he needs to win back, pretty near the top of their agenda.
The NHS polls very highly, and just below that is small boats. That's why we talk about the NHS on small boats on our channel, because we know it matters to people. Why wasn't it raised? I asked him that very question in the interview. I said, you know, the fact is 600,000 people arrived here net.
Legally,
Legally, not small boats, legally. Is that a worry? What's your number? Tens of thousands. Here's what I have to say.
Yeah. Of course we're concerned about it. I think anybody would be concerned by a government that's lost control of the borders. That has to be addressed. And that's why we set out in terms that we have to smash the criminal gangs that are running this vile trade. Go back to my days as Director of Public Prosecution. I did joint operations to smash terrorist gangs. I am convinced we can smash the gangs that are running this vile trade.
That's illegal immigration. What level are you happy with of the net number? 600,000 arrived in the 12 months till June last year.
Well, I'm not going to pluck a number out of the sky.
The Tories do.
Well, they do, and then they miss it over and over again. And we've ended up with a situation where the number is higher than it's ever been. But this is symptomatic, I think, of the last 13 years. One of the challenges that we laid down for the Tories yesterday is tell us what your record is, because if you've got a record after 13 years, you should be telling the country what it is. So that's why I contrasted them with our project, which is actually, let's not just fix the country, let's go on this journey of national renewal. And I can't stress it enough, it's a national journey. It is cross-party. You know, those that have lost faith in the party they are voting for are welcome to join us in this national project.
Well, by the end of it, you forgot what the question was about. But the point was that, you know, what is your number? And I think as we go into the election campaign next year, that'll be one of the key questions. One on tax, one on what level are you happy about on net migration, and not even small boats, Sir Nigel.
And this idea that as, you know, the former DPP, he was able to smash these big criminal gangs. Well, I hadn't noticed, you know, the drugs trade stopping in this country as a result of the DPP. I mean, do you actually think, Stephen Pound, that he can reduce those little dinghies coming across the Dover?
Well, I worked with him in Northern Ireland, and I have to say he was damned impressive. Very, very impressive as a public prosecutor in Northern Ireland, which is probably one of the hardest rows to hoe you can imagine.
Yeah.
And he managed to do it, and I think within a few months he was being detested by both sides, which meant that he was doing a pretty good job. You know. But look, I think what Keir Starmer is saying is important. Is let's not mess about with pie-in-the-sky nonsense like Rwanda and things. I mean, that's for the birds. It ain't going to happen. We all know it ain't going to happen.
Well, it might happen.
The Israelis tried it. Do you remember? They sent 4,000 people there. How long did that last? Look, the real problem is it's at the sausage machine. You've got to actually go to the input stage. What we have at the moment in this country is an utterly sclerotic, incompetent Home Office that takes years and years to determine cases. And what happens is you come to this country with no rights whatsoever to asylum. Keep your head down for 2 or 3 years, marry, have a child, settle yourself down, and then you have a thing called the regularisation of overstayers, and suddenly, you know, you've got permission to stay there because you've been here for 2 or 3 years. Now, I don't want to sort of put the Dutch as the great exemplars of this, but what they do in Holland, in the Netherlands, is they don't get past Schiphol Airport. They get determined there and then. And if they get sent back to Suriname or they get sent back to the East Indies...
So if they can do it, Stephen Powell, why can't we do it?
Well, you tell me. I think, don't forget, the Netherlands is more crowded than this country. And what they do, the one difference, I suppose, Nigel, is to be remotely fair just for a second, is that the majority of their immigrants actually come by plane.
Which makes life easier.
Yeah, it makes life easier.
Although, actually, the people that cross the Channel come in through Dover, go to Manston, so it's not very different.
I know, but they should be determined there and then. Look, I would defend...
Do you have confidence? Fine, I take the point. It's a very good point. Do you have confidence that Labour have got the stomach to deal with this?
Absolutely right, we have. Absolutely. We realise this is a visceral issue with the country. I mean, it's mostly your fault, I hasten to add. You know, there's a lot
all I've done is to educate and inform.
Yeah, I know, but you also shone a light on something, and you also made people think that they could do something about it. And before, people just said, oh, there's nothing we can do about it. It's just like the weather. It's going to happen. You actually started asking those questions, and they were damned awkward and uncomfortable questions. And as an elected politician at the time, I wished you'd go away. But you asked those questions. So there's no way that we're going to pass the buck now.
Stephen Pound, very bullish on that. And finally, Chris Hope, you know, was this a more confident Starmer that we saw over the last 48 hours?
I thought so. He's buttoned up. He's stiff. I think, to be fair to him, you know, journalists aren't where you're not naturally relaxing with people, but you know, privately he's on good form. I think he can see that power is around the corner if they don't mess it up. But things happen. I mean, don't forget, in September 2021, the Tories were briefing around Boris Johnson, 3 terms of Johnson.
I remember.
All the way through 2020.
Yeah.
Owen Paterson happened in October. November was Partygate. He'd gone by the following July.
Well,
that can happen.
There was a bit of hubris there with the Conservatives at that moment.
I look at this party and I think they are defining themselves by what they're not. They're saying we are not the Tories. And the risk is that in 2017, when Theresa May went to battle against Jeremy Corbyn, by being not Jeremy Corbyn didn't work. He even said in his speech that you want strong, stable government or words to that effect. Exactly what Theresa May...
You know the Ming vase theory, don't you?
Yeah. They're running around with this majority.
This famous comment. At the moment, you know, Keir Starmer is like a man carrying a Ming vase across a highly polished floor. Above all, he simply doesn't want to...
They want to tiptoe into office, not charge it.
But Chris, just look at the stuff that Bridget Phillipson said today about education. Look at what Wes Streeting is saying about the NHS. This is a Labour Shadow Secretary of State talking about utter reform of the NHS. We're talking about new technical colleges, and we're talking about what I mistakenly called GB News the other day. In fact, it's GB Energy. When actually rather upset
Can
the
I
BBC.
say only a Labour government can reform the NHS? The Tories can't do it.
I think that...
If you want to
Nixon in China,
if you want to
isn't it?
reform the NHS, believe in that one idea, I can't see the Tories getting away with it.
No, it's Nixon in China, you know.
And Stephen Pound, you're clearly, you know, you've worked with Keir Starmer, you've been impressed by Keir Starmer.
I played football with him.
Is he good?
He's bloody good. But I tell you what, he's a very different man. He's one of those midfield generals. He's like Roy Keane. You know, you would not want to get in the way of him.
Does he look like a PM in waiting?
Yes.
Is there a danger? Is there that 1992 Sheffield moment, danger of complacency?
He isn't going to do, all right. Or,
no, he's not going to do that.
No, there's a whole lot of other things happening in 1992. And I think we've actually moved on from that. We've actually grown up a little bit.
And no Palestinian flags?
Damn right, no.
In the hall.
And Corbynism gone?
Well, there were thousands. Well, yes, I think so. We all knew that they were tourists. I mean, they were.
There's still some of them there.
Yeah, but they were the Parisian bedbugs of politics. You know, they were coming and annoying.
Well, Nigel, they were outside.
I think they were more dangerous than bedbugs.
Yeah, there was a lot of them.
But they were still outside, weren't they?
But they weren't inside.
No, they weren't inside, and I've said that before on this show. Yeah. Actually, we have to give Starmer credit for driving out the hard left, and it's a pretty impressive thing that he's done. Now, of course, it wouldn't be a Labour conference without somebody. I was getting very worried. Would somebody please attack me from the stage? Well, Wes Streeting didn't let me down.
The Conservative Party dances to the tune of Nigel Farage now, and the more they move to the right, the greater their threat to our NHS becomes. So it falls to us, the party that founded the NHS 75 years ago, to rescue, rebuild and renew our health service today.
There you are. Nigel Farage wants to dismantle the National Health Service. And if he forces the Tories to the right, they'll face disaster. Well, the last time they copied me was in 2019, and they got an 80-seat majority.
That's my fault, 'cause I asked the PM last week whether you can rejoin the party, and he said we're a broad church. I'm doing the job for you, Nigel Farage.
It's a broad church full of knaves, but you know, I'm not entirely sure that Nigel joins the Tory. I think the Tory party could be joining Nigel.
Well, you never know. Stephen Pound, Christopher Hope, thank you very much.
Mr. Farage,
a bit of respect. Very, very good indeed. The King speaks out on the situation in Israel. I wonder, is it the right thing for the King to have done? It is, in many ways, a political thing to do. I'm pleased that he has, but there'll be a lot of debate around that, and we'll go live to Tel Aviv to join Charlie Peters to get the latest, as we understand that Hezbollah are now attacking northern Israel.
Drones.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, I asked you, is Keir Starmer a PM in waiting? Lots of opinions coming in. David via email says, I wouldn't trust Keir Starmer to run a bath. Never mind the country. No, but that wasn't really the question, David. Pat via email says, as a floating voter who enthusiastically voted for Blair, I will not make the same mistake again. I look at the shadow cabinet and despair. Sadly, none of the other parties produce a better response. Interesting, Pat, isn't it, that, you know, one of the people floating around that conference and clearly back with real influence is Lord Peter Mandelson. And finally, Dave says via Twitter, looks and sounds like one, and at least has a vision of building and growth, unlike the false promises and pure fantasy of the Tories. Sunak's network north now an illustration, not a plan at all. To the conflict in Israel and Gaza. I was surprised, actually. I really was surprised that we've seen statements coming out, today from the King, the Prince and Princess of Wales, and everybody is really, really condemning the killings and the barbarism that has took place. So the British royal family making their position on this absolutely clear. Let us go live to Tel Aviv to join GB News' reporter Charlie Peters. Charlie, good evening. We're hearing reports of Hezbollah now sending drones into northern Israel. We even had the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, having to run for cover earlier on today. Can you please give us an update on where we are on day 5 of this war?
Sure. Just in the last moments, the IDF has said that actually the reports in the north were a false alert. As you can imagine, the country is on very high alert. Israel, it appears, is not broken, but it is creaking and it is bruised. There is a very high sense of fear in Tel Aviv where we are. People are nervous. They are on edge. And there are concerns whenever reports come in that they will be acted on with the utmost severity. Just an hour and a half ago, we were in a rocket shelter in central Tel Aviv, away from our base location. We were about to go live on GB News with Patrick Christie's, and we were sent straight down. And many other parts of central Israel where we are have faced similar circumstances today. And when you see the news from the rest of the country, it's pretty clear why that sensitivity is there. Just 2 hours ago, the IDF said that it was killing more Palestinian Hamas terrorists, in the south of the country. Many Hamas terrorists have stayed within the south of Israel since that remarkable invasion on Saturday morning, coming in through paragliders, destroying target acquisition drones on the border and breaking through that fencing. So the north, the conflict is still going on there. There are sporadic shelling, especially also from Syria and from southern Lebanon, but it is not the level of escalation as was feared just 90 minutes ago with reports of drones and men crossing over the border. Now the IDF says that was just a false alert.
And over 2,000 people dead, and that number clearly rising quite rapidly. Of course, the Abraham Accords, these things negotiated by Jared Kushner on behalf of Donald Trump, now under serious threat. The relationship with Saudi Arabia, which was getting closer, under direct threat. Charlie, there are many in the international community urging restraint on Israel, which seems ironic given what they've been subjected to. Is your feeling that a full-on ground invasion of Gaza is going to happen in the next couple of days?
I think it is a realistic possibility that it will happen in the next 48 hours, and it is definitely likely in the next 72 to 96 hours. They are building in that direction. It's clear that the Israeli Defense Forces, its commanders, saying that they have a mission in mind when they are gathering regular and reserve forces on the south of the country near the border with Gaza. They have ginormous convoys of armour heading down. The amounts of military hardware being sent towards that area really is remarkable. Yeah. And so the diplomatic efforts we've seen this morning, the urges of restraint, that's really going to be, I think, quite indicative of shaping that ground invasion, the first since 2014. I think Israel wants to see that access towards Egypt through the Rafah crossing for civilians not aligned with the Hamas terrorists to exit before it commences what will almost certainly be a devastating ground invasion.
Yeah, it's coming, I've no doubt. Charlie Peters, thank you and stay safe. And let's have a quick look at the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, in Israel earlier on today. So you can see, you know, there he is, he's out, and suddenly rockets are on their way and everyone runs for the shelters. And this is the kind of jittery nervousness, understandable nervousness that Charlie Peters was just talking about. Now, I talked last night about Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, and she's saying to the police, look, you know, you really have got to stand up against those that are out there glorifying Hamas. A couple of things she said yesterday. One I did quote last night, I'll do it again. When you see chants such as, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, what that chant means is the obliteration of Israel as a country. But more interestingly, and very difficult, I think, for the police, is the idea where she says behaviours that are legitimate in some circumstances, for example, the waving of a Palestinian flag, may not be legitimate, such as when intended to glorify acts of terrorism. Well, I'm joined by Michael Phillips from Andrew Storch Solicitors, who joins me down the line from Coventry. Michael, this whole business of whether waving a Palestinian flag is actually coming out and supporting the atrocities caused by Hamas, does this not put the police, despite the pressure they're coming under from the Home Secretary, doesn't it put them in a devil of a situation?
I think it puts them in a very difficult situation. I spent probably the last 10 years or so representing people very often with very controversial opinions out in the streets, street preachers, pro-abortion, pro-life protesters, and very often they will get arrested by the police for Section 4 or Section 5 of the Public Order Act. And what sometimes determines whether they get arrested or not, and sometimes whether they get prosecuted, is really the feeling of the other people on the street. And if people are not bothered, then nothing happens. However, if on the other hand, people are upset by what happens, they get prosecuted. But what we find is this, is that in the end, usually, in fact, not usually, in fact, 100% of the time, they are acquitted of these offences. Because the fact is this, is that we do have freedom of speech in this country, and that must be respected. And even though we can look at these protesters, we can look at the flag wavers, and we say, we're appalled by this, we don't like their morality, I don't think it's probably the best thing for this country to do something like Germany or Austria, make it illegal, like they have in those countries, for Holocaust denial. It's an awful thing, it's a morally reprehensible thing, but doesn't make it a crime. And I would say we will face similar problems if you start waving a flag, Palestinian flag, and saying, well, that's a crime now, because what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and it could equally be applied to other people waving other flags.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I showed a video last night of somebody in Kensington High Street with, you know, the finger. Now, you know, you could say, well, that is somebody, you know, using, I'm just showing our viewers that picture now. You could say that is somebody using a symbol that was originally designed to be an Islamic symbol, saying there's one God, but now it's been appropriated and used quite extensively by ISIS. And yet, Michael, probably, if that goes to court, be very hard to convict, wouldn't it?
It would be very hard to convict, and indeed there is now a case which went up to the Supreme Court, the case of Ziegler, whereby there were some protesters which blocked the road in the Excel Centre, and the Supreme Court said in certain circumstances you can actually break the law and it's a specific defence to raise human rights grounds. So your Article 9 rights, your Article 10 rights, right to freedom of expression. And so that is the case which has been relied upon by lots of these people. So, for example, Insulate Britain and Extinction Rebellion, and they say, look, we are exercising our Article 10 rights, and so therefore we have a defence. And so it is very unlikely that there will be a conviction as a result of any action like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Michael Phillips, thank you for joining me live on GB News. Very difficult situation for the police. And one thing I must comment on is Black Lives Matter. Yes, Black Lives Matter UK have put out a statement today saying solidarity with those resisting Israeli war crimes and military occupation. We say free Palestine and support the practical solidarity of Palestine action. That is Black Lives Matter, folks. Do you remember the organisation that in 2020 were held up to be the saviours of civilization, the campaigners for racial equality, and were backed by all sorts of big banks, Starbucks, and many other corporate organisations? And I was one of the few voices back in 2020 saying, no, these are very bad, divisive, dangerous Marxist people. Well, once again, they prove it. In a moment, as Robert Kennedy Jr. announces he'll be running for US president as an independent, we ask the question, who does it hurt most, Biden or Trump?
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A lot happening in America as a Kennedy decides to run as an independent to become president of the USA, and the US Republicans are trying to pick a new speaker. Well, I'm joined by Brian T. Kennedy, Senior Fellow, Board Member of the Claremont Institute. Brian, good evening. Kennedy, I see even his own family have condemned him because he's running. Now, I was out with a pollster last night who's done a bit of work on this, and his thought was that the effect of Kennedy was in some ways quite neutral because he's very liberal on some issues which would appeal to Democrats and perhaps put off some Republicans, but his stance on the vaccine does actually appeal quite strongly to some in the Republican movement. And my pollster's feeling was, you know, it would be plus or minus 1 point state by state, and it wouldn't make that much difference overall. What say you?
Well, thank you for having me on, Nigel. Great admirer of GB News.
Thank you.
It seems to me Kennedy does appeal to both sides, and so it might be a wash. But when you look at his appeal to Democrats, it's that Kennedy mystique. And that's been a powerful thing over the years. I've been in rooms with Robert Kennedy. I'm no relation to him, by the way. But I've been in rooms with him, and he has a real appeal just that's hard to describe to everyday Democrats. I've been in rooms with him with Republicans. And I was at a speech at Hillsdale College. He and I were both speaking about big pharma and the harmful effects of the vaccine. He was in front of 800 conservatives in Michigan who were there from around the country and got a standing ovation. Now, these are hardcore Republicans for the most part. He got a standing ovation because he is criticizing both the big pharma medical establishment here in the United States, which seems to be a very harmful and ineffective, organization for actually, making sure Americans are healthy. He does that on the one hand. On the other hand, he goes after the American deep state, so-called, the apparatus of the intelligence community, and its inclination toward driving America toward endless wars. And so to the extent that he makes those arguments, they're very similar in many ways to the arguments of Donald Trump. Yeah. So I can see it playing out in a very interesting way. I think he'll be the most consequential third-party candidate since Ross Perot ran for president and moved the election from Bush to Bill Clinton.
Yeah, well, he did, and Perot got about 17% of the national vote. Yeah, I'm Ross, you're the boss, and it was a very impressive campaign. Well, Brian, I've not met Kennedy Jr., but friends of mine have been to speeches that he's given and said, yeah, he's a pretty inspiring figure. Now, the Republicans, this sort of small group of Republicans that forced out the Speaker, the ouster, as you call it, last week, and McCarthy was gone. It looks like Steve Scalise, who would be the more moderate, I suppose, of the two candidates, Jim Jordan being the other one. Steve Scalise been selected by the parliamentary group, but is he actually going to win? Is he going to become Speaker?
Well, it certainly looks that way right now, and he is the more moderate candidate. He's more of an institutionalist, they say, but he's also a very close ally of Kevin McCarthy. And so Kevin McCarthy, in effect, would, in this with Scalise, McCarthy would in effect be a very influential figure in a Scalise speakership.
Yeah, well, it's going to be very interesting to see. I want to say, Brian, thank you for joining us on the programme, and come back and see us again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Indeed. Bed bugs. It's the big story, of course, in France. Pictures of people turfing their mattresses out onto the streets in Marseille. And some panic here with Sadiq Khan saying that public transport was a real source of concern, but everything was being done. Well, a very senior British technical officer for the British Pest Control Association has said, we are not ready for an invasion of bed bugs. Well, John Horsley joins me down the line right now. What do you mean we're not ready, John Horsley? Surely if this was to happen, we must have the insecticides that we would use to deal with it?
Yeah, we've got everything in place at the minute. We're not expecting to have a big wave of bed bugs to come this way. Obviously, we've had bed bugs in this country since the 17th century. Just like everyone, there was a decrease in the 1940s, and then since then, we have seen a steady increase. And a majority of that is linked to through our travel. So the more we travel, the more likely these bed bugs are going to, be around.
John, what should people do if they discover these in their house? Is it a matter of calling in a pest officer, or is there anything over the counter we could buy, perhaps, to help with the problem?
Yeah, bed bugs are notoriously difficult to treat. They won't just be found in your bed. You'll get them in your carpet, under your carpet, plug sockets, back to TVs. They tend to get everywhere if you get a bad infestation. The best thing to do is try and spot the signs early and then get someone in from a pest management company to deal with that issue as quickly as possible. The quicker you deal with it, the smaller the infestation will be, and it's normally a lot easier to deal with that in that way.
Yeah, look, I absolutely, in all things in life, when in doubt, call in a professional. I think that's right. But is there anything you can do individually? Is there anything I can go and buy that might help stop the spread?
things like, think about how you use your house. So if you've got bedding that's infested with bed bugs, just be careful when you're taking it down into your washing machine that, you're not leaving it in the living room, for instance, and it's spreading. So managing that infestation is key and preventing the spread of it. Actually, things you can do yourself is quite difficult. You can wash bedding on a high temperature and tumble dry it. That will help control them. But actually getting rid of the infestation would be difficult with anything over the counter.
Gosh, yeah. And how bad is this in France? I mean, is this the British tabloid press playing it up, or is it really a problem?
They have got a particular problem in France at the minute. It has been well documented that it has raised slightly. Over here, we don't have a massive increase in bed bugs. We do have them in areas. It will move around as people are moving around. But yeah, it's not a big issue here as of yet. I don't expect to see them travelling over in big waves. It's just same as last year. If people are travelling, there may be chance that you can come into contact with them. That chance is still very slim. But just be mindful. And I think all the coverage that has been around, it's great that people have sort of learnt a bit around bed bugs. And if it prevents someone from, infesting their property with them because they spot the signs early, that's a great thing that we've done.
And the downside is you get bitten and you get sort of blotchy marks on your body.
Yeah, that's, it's going to be uncomfortable. They may be slightly itchy, but in majority of cases, as long as you don't scratch them, they will just go away. It may be a slight delay once you've been bitten. If you've not been bitten before, it can take sort of up to 2 weeks for that bite to show. So it might not be instant. Yeah, you will get them in rows and clusters. So you'll get, a few together because they take a little while to feed. And as you disturb them when you sleep, they'll move slightly and then feed again. So you tend to see little rows and clusters of bite marks.
Right. Well, it's not the most pleasant of subjects, but I think, John Horsley, the message is don't panic. And thank you very much indeed for joining us live on GB News. And the trouble is, telling people not to scratch, it was like telling a kid not to pick at their chickenpox spots. It just doesn't really happen, does it? Day 3 of the big case at the Supreme Court over Rwanda today. And one of the King's counsellors representing the migrants has put forward an argument that could be catastrophic for the government.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Day 3 in the Supreme Court of the big Rwanda judgment, and Richard Drabble KC, representing one of the migrants that does not want to be sent off to Rwanda, has made an argument that says under EU law you cannot put asylum seekers in countries with which they have no real connection. But you say, none of that matters. We've got Brexit. Yes, but the Drabble argument is that in Brexit, whilst we got back our rights over legal immigration, we didn't bother to opt out over the bits on asylum. Now, of course, the Home Office is saying this simply isn't true. I don't know what the answer is, but if Drabble is right, then the government is absolutely sunk over its Rwanda plan. Well, I'm joined by Fadi Farhat, Senior Legal Consultant at Gulbenkian Aldonian Lawyers. And Fadi, we've discussed this before on the programme, but this argument has come as a bit of a bolt from the blue, hasn't it?
Yes, Nigel, it has. It all goes down to the Withdrawal Act, the 2020 Withdrawal Act. Section 1 says that it's an act to end rights relating to free movement. And, I quote, other retained EU law relating to immigration.
But this is asylum.
But not relating to immigration and asylum. So it's just those 2 words that needed to be added to the end of the provision, relating to immigration and asylum. The argument is that immigration and asylum are distinct areas. Asylum being the 1951 Refugee Convention.
Yes.
Immigration can mean lots of things. Can mean work permits, can mean studying, can mean visiting, can mean a whole bunch of things, and therefore they are 2 distinct areas, is the argument put forward by Mr. Drabble KC.
But we were told there was an oven-ready deal, that it was all sorted out.
That's the government's counter-argument, is that immigration, the word immigration, is broad enough to cover asylum as well. And indeed, although there are many provisions in our laws that refer to immigration and asylum as distinct areas, in most cases they are also used interchangeably. And for example, the rules relating to asylum and how to claim asylum are contained in a document called the Immigration Rules, not the Asylum Rules.
Okay.
So that's one argument the government has. Unfortunately, there are examples, up to 60 other examples, where they are treated quite differently. And so that's where the argument put forward by Mr. Drabble KC has some traction. However, it was an argument dismissed by the High Court and by the Court of Appeal. So the Supreme Court is looking at it afresh, but it was dismissed initially by the High Court and the Court of Appeal. That's no indicator that the Supreme Court will follow the High Court and the Court of Appeal. Very often the Supreme Court provides fresh analysis and actually overturns the High Court and Court of Appeal. We just don't know. It's a semantical gamble, as it were.
Gosh. It does all point to one thing, though, doesn't it? That despite the years that we had to get ready for this Brexit agreement, that actually we finish up with something that is, in this case, highlights it, that is pretty unclear.
Yes, and all it would have taken is 2 words to include.
And does that, Fadi Farhat, as a lawyer, say to you that the government did not do as good a job as perhaps they could have done?
They could have made it far more watertight if that was, and that's the argument put forward, is that it was so obvious and you didn't make it watertight, meaning, therefore, you didn't intend to include provisions relating to asylum.
It does sound like, I mean, whichever way the judgment goes, and this particular part of the judgment, it does appear that the government have actually landed themselves in potentially a very difficult situation. It does sound to me like Casey Drabble's argument's quite powerful, I have to confess. It does sound that way.
It's a compelling argument.
To me, and it worries me greatly. So, we've had a 3-day hearing. There are 5 judges there on the Supreme Court. How long do we have to wait, do you think, for a judgment?
It's quite difficult. It's that how long's a piece of string type reference.
We can't wait forever.
We can't wait forever, but many are saying we should be able to get something this side of Christmas. So
okay.
You know, we could go into.
So we're talking about a few months.
Yes.
We get something before Christmas, and if the Supreme Court rules that we should trust our government, our Home Secretary, to make these judgments on Rwanda, then they can start flights to Rwanda early next year.
Yes.
Or, if we get to that point where the government wins, could they then be taken to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg?
Yes, because putting aside this issue of drafting and wording, the ultimate issue is whether Rwanda is a safe third country or whether sending people to Rwanda would be a breach of Article 3 of the ECHR. And of course, the ambit of ECHR rights are decided in Strasbourg.
So even if the government wins, it still hasn't actually yet won.
Not until the fat lady sings, and that's in Strasbourg.
And a case in Strasbourg would take how long to be heard?
That could be the best part of, well, I suppose an issue of this importance may be streamlined or fast-tracked, but again, we're talking the best end of 12 months plus, I should imagine.
Which would take us beyond, and not that it's your responsibility, but would take us beyond
a general election
the
period.
next
Yes.
general election. And if the government loses, that's it. Rwanda's finished.
If it loses on the Article 3 point relating to ECHR rights, yes, the programme is dead and buried. If it were to lose on this point of drafting, Parliament could go back and reword the Withdrawal Act. But of course, you might not have enough time to do that because you're heading into a general election period either way.
There is just so much frustration in the country around this. You know, I mean, maybe it's simplistic, but I think what Brexit voters thought they were going to get was absolute clarity that we would make these big, important decisions, and clearly we haven't yet done it. Has anybody else ever left the ECHR? Would we be the first country to say we're not going to stay with this anymore, or do other countries just ignore their judgments? How does it work?
No, I believe no country has left the ECHR after being a signatory, so, countries may not implement certain judgments as comprehensively as others, but this would be a first.
Very diplomatically put. Fadi Wyatt, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Worrying. Jacob Rees-Mogg joins me. Jacob, we were chatting before the show about what happens to electric vehicles if there's a fire, referring to Luton.
Yes, indeed.
Have you found any more out about this?
Well, I've heard that it may have come from a Tesla charging point.
Oh.
There seems to be a revelation that somebody sent to me. I haven't been able to check whether this is absolutely certain, but if that is true, it really does raise serious questions about electric cars.
Because the original story was that it was a diesel Range Rover, something had gone wrong. But what we do, I think, know is that if an electric car combusts, it's quite a spectacular thing.
Oh, that's definitely true. It's much more spectacular, and it's also much harder to put out. So it'd be really interesting to find out what the fire brigade says about this when it does its report on why the fire took off as it did, how it spread so quickly, why it wasn't just confined to one car, and the intensity of the heat that we've been reading about that seems to have destroyed the building.
Yeah, and reports, not proven, that electric vehicles were sort of...
But only a report.
I know.
You know, I don't want to...
no, but we're going to follow this and watch it.
Yes.
Now, what have you got coming up tonight?
We're obviously going to be talking more about what's going on in Israel and the extent to which Iran is behind it. How much is this George Bush Jr.'s axis of evil? That bad people, bad actors, people who are fundamentally opposed to the West, really trying to do things that damage all of our interests, and how important it is that the UK supports Israel, but also Ukraine, because Iran and Russia and North Korea are three of the friends on the axis of
I
evil.
never understood, Jacob. I never understood the Iran nuclear deal. I never understood why Obama backed it. I never understood why the European Union backed it. I never understood why Boris Johnson, as Foreign Secretary, backed it. Have we got our strategy wrong on Iran over the last few years?
Well, I think the deal is one that clearly hasn't worked, and that Iran has broken the terms of it again and again, is clearly trying to get a nuclear weapon, and the burned fool's bandaged finger goes wobbling back to the fire, that we should take our finger firmly away from the fire and make sure Iran doesn't get the cash that it wants.
Absolutely.
And the support that it wants.
They got $6 billion from Joe Biden.
And they got $400 million from us last year.
I know. It's unbelievable. Let's have a look at the weather.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Today's rain clears south, turning sunnier in the north for Thursday, but also turning colder as weather fronts sink south, allowing cold air from the north to push into much of the UK. However, these weather fronts, marking the boundary between warm air to the south and cold air to the north, contain some wet weather. And we've certainly seen a wet day across much of Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia. And rain sinks slowly south overnight. Still some heavy downpours through parts of South Wales, the South Midlands, East Anglia. Damp and gloomy as we begin things on Thursday, but mild in the far south. Colder but brighter across Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, a frost in places. And actually, that's where the brightest weather will remain throughout Thursday. Plenty of sunny spells for Northern Ireland, North Wales, Northern England, southern and eastern Scotland. Still some showers and a bit of a breeze for the northwest of Scotland, but not as much as Wednesday. Further south, it stays damp and gloomy. All the heavier rain eases for a time. 19 Celsius in the south, albeit with grey leaden skies. Then the rain peps up once again through much of Wales, the Midlands, Northern England for a time on Friday morning. Some heavy downpours also potentially for the southeast of England. Could cause some issues, a rain warning in force. That clears through, and then colder weather arrives for the weekend, with quite a few showers for Saturday, drier for Sunday, and some overnight frosts.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions